Hi there, this is Groovy and G, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a quick little video on Rewire and getting that to work with Logic. I've got a template for you, I've got some Midi stuff we're going to do, and really it's just about kind of combining Renoise with other programs and other DAWs. A few people have been talking on the Facebook group about this, and I thought it might be a good time to do a quick little tutorial on it. So we're going to dive in, and I'm going to show you how to do this on a Mac, but I also think it's quite a similar workflow on Windows. Okay, so the first thing we've got to do is set up this Midi driver. Now what you do is go into Spotlight Search and go into Audio Midi Setup, and you're going to get this window, and yours will probably have this show audio devices. There you go. Yours will probably prop up like this, and so what you got to do is go into Window and Show Midi Studio, and that's going to bring up this kind of Midi Studio interface. And then what you're looking for is this IAC driver, and by default yours will probably be grayed out at the bottom like this. All you got to do is double click it and then click Device is Online, and that's going to bring this IAC driver online so we can use it. Windows doesn't actually have anything kind of built in like this, but there are lots of programs you can find to help you out here, and I've actually just went and did a little bit of a search online, and I found this article I'll link in my description, and it basically says you've got this thing called Loop Midi that you can use, and if you kind of follow this link through, it's a very similar kind of device you can download for Windows. So that's there for Windows users, and I'll link that below. But once we've got the Midi Studio set up, we've just got to go and quit all this stuff down, make sure that's online, and then we're going to load up Logic first. Okay, so I've loaded a completely blank project in Logic, and we just got to do a couple of things in the preferences. So go Preferences General, and then in Audio, you've got to come to the bottom here, and it says Rewire Behavior, and you want this on Live Mode. And that's going to mean when we load up Renoise, it's all going to connect up for us. Now the only other thing that's useful for Logic is potentially to have this low latency mode on. So you can right click in this control bar, and then you can have this low latency monitoring mode, and then you can just trigger it on and off here by clicking this icon. And that can be useful for reducing some of the latency, especially if you start using lots of plugins in Logic, you're going to get some latency. And then I'm now going to go and load Renoise when I've got Logic open. And you're going to get this pop-up that's asking you if you'd like to connect Renoise and Logic together, and you've just got to click yes there, and it's going to load Renoise. So I can get rid of this, and then I'm actually going to go no template as well in Renoise. Okay, so I've got to do some preferences in Renoise now as well. And this is just in the audio settings of Renoise. I've got to make sure it's on full transport sync, and I've ticked this automatically compensate latencies as well. And then you want to make sure automatic plugin delay compensation is on as well, and those are the kind of ones you want to make sure you have on from Renoise side. You can basically send any of these tracks, or you can send groups to the different buses in Logic. So let's create one for a track and one for, if I put this at the start, okay, and one for a group. So Rewire. So what you've got to do from Renoise's side of it is to come to the mix window, and at the bottom here you can see the kind of routing for the tracks. And rather than sending out the master output, we actually want to send out these buses. So this one's going to go out bus 1, and this one's going to go out bus 2. Now you can see I've got this kind of section here which is where the bus is going out. So you can output individual channels, or you can output bus channels, which is quite useful if you're doing a full mix and you want to kind of group some of the tracks, like the drums that are going into Logic. So from Logic's side of things, you've got to come into the mixer window, and you go Options, Create New Auxiliary Channel Strip. And then on the input of the channel strip, you have to go to Renoise and select the bus 1 to be the input. Okay, so now if I load an instrument in Renoise and I'm triggering it, you can see it's coming into Logic here. So that's all well and good, but usually you want to record the tracks from Renoise into Logic. So I'm going to show you how to do that. What we've got to do is send this output to a bus. So we're sending the Renoise input to a bus, and then we're going to send the bus to an audio track. So if we create all these tracks, it might make it a little bit easier. And this is our Rewire 1, and let's put this in, and this is going to be called Record 1. Okay, and then on the record track, I need to select the input to be bus 1. And then now, if I just put in some note data and I hit record on the record track, we've got it all coming into Logic. And if you zoom right in, you can see it's got really good. There's a tiny bit maybe, but that might be in this sample. If I zoom right into the sample in the beginning, there's actually, it's got this tiny bit of dead space at the sample, start of the sample. So if I actually delete that and do this again, you can see the latency for recording tracks in is actually really good, and you're getting basically no latency at all. You can send all your tracks from Renoise into Logic and record them all, and it's all going to come in nicely for you in Logic. So that's the kind of basics of the Rewire workflow in Logic. You can kind of route these tracks into Logic. Pressing play in either of the windows is going to start the clock, which is really handy, and so you can kind of just work sending audio from Renoise into Logic that way. Now what you can also do is send MIDI data. So if I go and create a new software track in Logic, and in this track information area here, I've got to make sure the input channel is on 1. This is in the new version of Logic, so it looks a little bit different to what you'll probably have, but just make sure that the MIDI in channel is 1. And then go to a new instrument in Renoise, and what I can do is go to this MIDI section, and then in output device I can select that IAC driver that we set up before, and I can make sure it's going out channel 1. So these are now all linked up, and if I say load a instrument like a synthesizer, I can then use anything that's triggering this instrument. Something really simple like that. I can now trigger this channel using Renoise. And if I record the MIDI, cool, that's come through nicely. What I want to show you here is that there is a little bit of latency with the MIDI. So zooming right into this MIDI file, if I select it and press Q, can you see it just moves the tiniest amount when I'm quantizing it to the grid. So this is perfectly quantized in Renoise, so it should perfectly quantize in Logic, but it is a little bit off. Now it's not the end of the world with MIDI, because you can quantize it and you can do the same thing you do with audio, where you drag it, you select all the MIDI and you drag the first note to kind of align with your song. But I just want you to be aware that with this method there is a tiny, I mean that's probably just 1 millisecond, if that, of latency. It's the tiniest amount, so you might not even notice it. It's so minimal, but this will probably stack up later on in your project, so just be aware that there is a tiny bit of latency with this workflow. Now what is really cool is you can set up multiple versions of these MIDI instruments. So if I select another one and I come into this MIDI window and I make sure this is on channel 2, I go to a new instrument, create a new one in Logic and make sure the Logic one is responding to MIDI channel 2. Then if I just select a different bass noise, maybe go up an octave, and I can play. And then I've now got, if I delete this thing again, you've got to hit record on both the tracks. I've got both these MIDI tracks coming to Logic, and I can say make this one a quick sampler instrument, and I can say let's load maybe a drum break, and cool. Oh, I am at the wrong tempo, so changing the tempo in either of the programs is also going to sync up. And you can start to stack up different MIDI tracks playing to different on different channels and routing them into Logic to lots of different channels. One thing that in the newer version of Logic it isn't so much of a problem but in older versions it is this sneaky little setting in Logic, which is, I've got a picture of it here, and I remember this from having to find this from before, is in your project settings in recording, you want this auto demix by channel if multi-track recording, you want that ticked on. And that's going to help you when you kind of arm these different MIDI tracks. It's going to record all the different ones when you want to record MIDI from all the different tracks. So that's one sneaky little setting you want to be aware of. What I have done is I've gone ahead and I've created a really nice template file. Now, if I open this up in Logic, what I've essentially done is created all the MIDI tracks, and I've routed them all to the different channels. I've done 8 MIDI tracks going out different channels, and then I've created all the kind of rewire tracks. So I've got the auxes coming in here, and then I've routed them to the buses, and then the buses are going to all the record tracks, and I've kind of cleaned it up so you've got this nice 2 folders to work from. And I've also gone and created a Renoise template as well, where I have got all the MIDI tracks, and I've set all the MIDI tracks up in here, and I've routed them all correctly. And then I've also created some rewire tracks, and I've routed these all correctly out into Logic. So you've got kind of all of this stuff set up and ready to go. And if you want to create a song using both Logic and Renoise, you can load these templates quickly up, and I've created them both on a blank project, so there's none of my plugins or anything in there to be annoying. And these just run straight away from you. The only problem we might have is that I'm running a very new version of Logic, and you might get that error message where it doesn't like you importing projects from the future into older versions of Logic, but I think it should work. If it doesn't, let me know, and I will go and try and get an old version of Logic on an old Mac and figure that out. But anyway, that stuff will all be down below in the comments, and you can go to my website to grab that. One last thing I want to talk about is with this workflow, it's ideal if you have 2 monitors, because you can have Renoise on one and Logic on the other. But if you don't, Spaces on a Mac, which I'm sure lots of you will use, is actually kind of epic to do this. What you do is you can kind of press Command and the up key, and this will take you to this mission control area, I think, and you can create new desktops with this plus icon. But you can kind of drag a window in there. So I've got Logic in one and Renoise in 2, and I can use the command right and left arrows to go in between the 2 applications, which works quite nicely. One other thing that's very useful is if you come into your keyboard, into preferences and then into keyboard, and onto shortcuts, mission control, there's a couple here that say switch to desktop 1, 2 and 3, and you want to tick them on. And it basically means you can use control 1, 2 or 3 to swap between the desktops. But the good thing about this is it's a lot more snappy. Using control here to swap between the 2 is a lot quicker. If I use the left and right arrows, it has this kind of like lag in the animation, whereas 1 and 2 are much quicker. And so I quite like using control 1 and 2 to just really quickly snap between the 2 kind of desktop views when I'm doing stuff like this. So that's the last little bit of information, and I hope this has all been useful for you and cleared up some of the kind of issues you might have been having connecting Renoise to Logic. So that's all from me today, and peace.